The original marriage. In the very beginning, when God made the world, He created the first man, Adam. But Adam was alone, so God said, "It's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper for him." God caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep. While he slept, God took one of Adam's ribs and used it to make the first woman, Eve. When Adam woke up and saw her, he knew she was different from all the animals. He said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." She was part of him, literally. That's why the Bible says, "For this reason, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and they become one flesh." This was the first marriage ever, but it was also very strange. No other marriage in history happened this way. Eve didn't come from another family or nation. She came straight from Adam's own body. They were truly one flesh, in the most real sense. It's a picture that still shows us what marriage means. Two people becoming one, just like Adam and Eve.
Half-sibling marriage. Abraham is known as the father of faith, but his marriage has a strange twist. His wife, Sarah, was not just his wife, she was also his half-sister. In Genesis 20, verse 12, Abraham tells King Abimelech, "She really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife." At that time, this wasn't forbidden, but later, in Moses' law, God clearly says brothers and sisters must not marry each other. Leviticus 18, verse 9. So what Abraham and Sarah did would be against the law if it happened later. Their story shows us how things were very different in the early days. Back then, people lived longer, and the human family was still very close. But God later set rules to protect families and stop this kind of marriage.
Surrogate wife. Abraham and Sarah were promised a child by God, but as years passed, Sarah stayed childless. So Sarah came up with her own plan. In Genesis 16, 1-4, Sarah told Abraham to sleep with her maid Hagar so they could have a child through her. This was an ancient custom, like a form of surrogacy, but it wasn't what God wanted. Hagar did get pregnant, but instead of fixing things, it caused jealousy and pain. Hagar looked down on Sarah, Sarah treated Hagar harshly, and Abraham was caught in the middle. This strange family setup brought trouble that still echoes through history, all because they tried to help God's promise in their own way.
Lot and his daughters. After Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, Lot escaped with his two daughters. They hid in a cave in the mountains because they were scared to stay anywhere else. His daughters thought there were no men left to marry them, so the older sister said, "Let's get our father drunk and sleep with him. That way we can have children and keep our family alive." One night they gave Lot wine, and the older sister slept with him. The next night they did it again, and the younger sister did the same. Both daughters got pregnant by their own father. The older sister's son was named Moab. His family became the Moabites. The younger sister's son was Ben-Ami. His family became the Ammonites. It was a shameful thing, but these two sons grew into two nations that appear many times in the Bible.
Two sisters as wives. Jacob fell in love with Rachel, the younger daughter of Laban. He agreed to work 7 years just to marry her. The Bible says those years seemed like a few days to him because of his love for her. But on the wedding night, Laban tricked him. He gave him Leah, the older sister, instead. Jacob didn't know until the next morning. Angry, he asked Laban why he deceived him. Laban said it wasn't their custom to marry off the younger before the older. So he told Jacob, "Finish Leah's bridal week, then you can have Rachel too, if you work 7 more years for me." Jacob agreed. He finished the week with Leah, then married Rachel as well. He loved Rachel more than Leah. Later, in Moses' law, marrying sisters at the same time was forbidden. But Jacob's family, the 12 tribes of Israel, came from these two sisters and their maidservants.
Father-in-law trick. Tamar was married to Judah's son but was so wicked that God put him to death. Judah told his second son, Onan, to give Tamar a child, but Onan refused, and God struck
struck him too. Judah promised Tamar his youngest son Shelah when he grew up, but he didn't keep his word. So Tamar took matters into her own hands. She disguised herself as a prostitute and waited for Judah on the road. Judah didn't recognize her. He slept with her and promised to send her a young goat as payment. As a pledge, Tamar took his seal, cord, and staff. Later, when Judah found out Tamar was pregnant, he wanted her punished. But she proved he was the father by showing his seal and staff. Judah said, "She is more righteous than I, because I didn't give her my son Shelah." Tamar gave birth to twins, Perez and Zerah. Through Perez, Tamar became part of the family line that would lead to King David, and later, Jesus.
Midianite Wife. After fleeing Egypt for killing an Egyptian, Moses settled in the land of Midian. There, he met Zipporah, one of the 7 daughters of Jethro, also called Reuel, the priest of Midian. Jethro welcomed Moses into his home after Moses defended his daughters from some shepherds at a well. In time, Moses married Zipporah, and they had 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar. What made this marriage strange is that Zipporah was a Midianite, a foreign woman from a priestly family outside Israel. Later, God warned Israel not to marry people from pagan nations because it could lead them away from him. Yet God still used Moses and Zipporah's family in his plan to deliver Israel from Egypt.
Forbidden love sparks feuds. Before Delilah, Samson had another controversial love story, one that set off a chain of violence and betrayal. Samson, chosen by God as a Nazirite from birth, was meant to live set apart, but when he became a young man, he saw a Philistine woman in Timnah and told his parents, "Get her for me as my wife." His parents were shocked. Israelites weren't supposed to marry Philistines, who worshipped other gods. They pleaded with him to find a wife from his own people, but Samson refused. Behind this odd choice, however, was something bigger. The Bible says this was from the Lord because God planned to use Samson's desire to pick a fight with Israel's enemies. At the wedding feast, Samson told a riddle that angered the Philistines. When his new wife betrayed his secret to her people, he lost a bet and burned with anger. In revenge, he killed 30 men to pay his debt. The marriage fell apart quickly. Her father secretly gave her to another man. When Samson found out, he set fire to the Philistines' crops using foxes with burning torches tied to their tails. The feud escalated into brutal conflict, all sparked by one marriage that broke custom and revealed Samson's reckless heart.
Not officially married, Samson, known for his God-given strength, fell in love with a woman named Delilah in the valley of Sorek. Unlike his earlier wife from Timnah, Delilah is never called his wife in the Bible. Still, their relationship had a strange, intimate, almost domestic feel. She lived close to him, and he spent time in her home. The Philistine rulers offered Delilah silver to find out the secret of Samson's strength. Delilah pressed him daily, nagging and questioning, until Samson finally revealed that his strength came from never cutting his hair, part of his Nazirite vow to God. Once she had his secret, Delilah lulled Samson to sleep on her lap and had his hair cut. Then she called the Philistines, who captured Samson, gouged out his eyes, and imprisoned him. Though not officially married, Delilah acted like a partner, but her love was a mask, and her betrayal led to Samson's downfall.
Given away, then taken back. Michal was Saul's daughter, and she loved David. When Saul saw this, he used it as a trap. He told David he could marry Michal, but only if he killed 100 Philistines. Saul hoped David would die trying, but David went out, fought hard, and brought back what Saul demanded. So Michal became his wife. But Saul's jealousy only grew. He hunted David like an enemy. While David ran for his life, Saul took Michal and gave her to another man named Paltiel. Michal lived with Paltiel as his wife for years, while David hid in the wilderness. When Saul died and David rose to power, he wanted Michal back. She was part of his claim to Saul's throne. David sent word to Saul's old commander, "Bring me Michal." So they took her from Paltiel's house. Paltiel followed behind, weeping for his wife as soldiers led her away. But his tears changed changed nothing. Michal was taken back to David, a wife caught between men, power, and broken loyalties. Their marriage never healed. Later, when David danced before the Lord, Michal mocked him. The Bible says she never had children. Her story ends with a bitter heart in a royal house.
Widow marries future king. Abigail was the wife of Nabal, a rich but rude man living in the wilderness of Maon. David and his men had protected Nabal's shepherds and flocks in the desert. When David asked for food in return, Nabal mocked him, calling him a runaway servant. David was furious. He strapped on his sword and told his men to get ready. By morning, every male in Nabal's house would be dead. But Abigail, wise and quick, heard what her husband had done. Without telling Nabal, she loaded donkeys with bread, wine, meat, and cakes and rode out to meet David. When she saw him, she bowed low and pleaded for mercy. She spoke with courage and honor, reminding David not to stain his hands with needless blood. David listened. Her words calmed his anger. He blessed her for stopping him from doing something he'd regret. When Abigail went home, Nabal was drunk at a feast. The next morning, she told him how close he had come to death. His heart failed him, and 10 days later, the Lord struck him dead. When David heard Nabal was dead, he wasted no time. He sent servants to ask Abigail to become his wife. She agreed and bowed again, this time not to stop bloodshed, but to join her life to a man who would soon be king. Abigail's quick wisdom turned her from a rich man's overlooked wife into the bride of Israel's future ruler, all because she acted boldly when it mattered most.
Adultery and murder. King David was supposed to be at war with his men, but one evening he stayed behind in Jerusalem. As he walked on his rooftop, he saw a woman bathing. Her name was Bathsheba, beautiful, married, and completely unaware she was being watched. David sent messengers to bring her to the palace. He slept with her, even though she was the wife of Uriah, one of his loyal soldiers. Later, Bathsheba sent word to David she was pregnant. To cover his sin, David called Uriah back from battle, hoping he'd go home to his wife. But Uriah refused. He slept at the palace gates instead, saying he couldn't enjoy home comforts while his men were in tents at war. Seeing his plan fail, David took a darker step. He wrote a secret order for Joab, the army commander, to put Uriah at the front lines, where the fighting was fiercest, then pull the troops back. Uriah was left to die, and he did. After Uriah's death, David brought Bathsheba to his house and made her his wife. But what he thought was hidden was wide open to God. The prophet Nathan came and told David a story of a rich man stealing a poor man's only lamb. David was angry until Nathan said, "You are the man." David's sin brought deep pain. Their child died soon after birth, just as Nathan warned. David wept and fasted, but the child did not live. Still, God was not done with David and Bathsheba. Later, they had another son, Solomon, who would become Israel's wisest king and build the temple of the Lord. Their story is messy and tragic, yet shows how even in the worst sin, God's plan moves forward, but not without consequence. The Moabite line. Ruth was a Moabite woman, and by Israel's law in Deuteronomy, Moabites were not supposed to enter the Lord's assembly for 10 generations. But Ruth's story is different. After her Israelite husband died, Ruth stayed loyal to her mother-in-law, Naomi. She left her own people to live among the Israelites, choosing Naomi's God as her God. When they returned to Bethlehem, Ruth worked in the fields to provide for them. There she met Boaz, a kind and wealthy man who was a relative of Naomi's late husband. Following Israel's custom, Boaz stepped in as Ruth's kinsman redeemer, marrying her to keep her husband's family line alive. Their marriage, though unusual because of Ruth's Moabite background, showed God's grace breaking barriers. From Ruth and Boaz's line came King David, and generations later, Jesus himself.
700 wives and 300 concubines. King Solomon was known for his wisdom, the wisest man who ever lived, but his love life told another story. The Bible says Solomon loved many foreign women, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. God had warned Israel not to marry from these nations because they worshipped other gods, but Solomon didn't listen. He married not just one or two, but 700 wives, princesses from royal families, and added 300 concubines on top of that. At first, it seemed like political genius. Each marriage made peace with a kingdom, but behind the alliances was a trap. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away from the Lord. He built shrines for their gods, Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Moloch, idols that demanded wicked practices. The king who built the glorious temple for the Lord now built altars for false gods on the hills of Jerusalem. His divided heart brought trouble for Israel. God told Solomon that his kingdom would be torn apart after his death because of this betrayal. Solomon's many marriages show how even the wisest person can fall when they ignore God's clear instructions. What started as love and politics ended in idolatry, proving that no amount of human wisdom replaces simple obedience.
The prostitute wife. The prophet Hosea had one of the strangest marriages in the Bible, and it wasn't about romance, but a lesson for a whole nation. God told Hosea, "Go, marry a promiscuous woman." So Hosea married Gomer, a woman who would not stay faithful. Their marriage was a living message. Israel was like Gomer, unfaithful to God, running after other lovers and false gods. Hosea and Gomer had children together, but she kept leaving him for other men. She chased empty promises, ignoring the love she already had at home. Finally, she ended up so lost that she was sold like a slave. But Hosea didn't give up. God told him, "Go show your love to your wife again." So Hosea found Gomer and paid to buy her back, even though she was already his by marriage. He brought her home and told her, "Live with me in faithfulness." Hosea's broken heart showed how deeply God felt about his people's unfaithfulness, yet how far he would go to bring them back. Gomer's return wasn't just about one marriage, it was a promise that even when we run far, God's love still calls us home.
Brother's wife. One of the most scandalous marriages in the New Testament was between Herod Antipas and Herodias, and it ended in a prophet's death. Herod Antipas was a ruler in Galilee. Herodias was married to his brother Philip, but Herod wanted her for himself, so he convinced her to leave Philip and marry him instead. This wasn't just a family drama. Under Jewish law, it was forbidden for a man to marry his brother's wife while the brother was still alive. John the Baptist saw the sin and called it out boldly. He told Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Herodias hated John for exposing them. Herod threw John in prison, but he also liked to listen to him, even though the truth made him uneasy. One night, during Herod's birthday party, Herodias' daughter danced for the guests. Pleased, Herod promised her anything she wanted. Coached by her mother, the girl asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Trapped by his own promise and pride, Herod gave the order. John was beheaded, all because one strange marriage couldn't stand the truth.